Hello, this is the Fiction Nonfiction podcast from Literary Hub, where we believe that every issue in your Twitter feed or on the evening news has already been tackled somewhere in literature. I'm V.V. Ganeshananthan, also known as Sugi, author of the novel Love Marriage.
And I'm Whitney Terrell, author of the novel The Good Lieutenant.
So wait, did you catch President Biden's address to Congress?
I am enjoying a period of time when I do not feel that the republic is about to fall apart or a crazy person will be yelling at me, and I am skipping addresses by presidents for right now. He seems an okay guy. I'm fine.
Well, one of the quote unquote radical statements Biden made was that white supremacy is terrorism. And I think, for some folks, especially people of color in the US, it's a pretty no-duh thing to say. I should say, did not watch this. My print reporter bias is that I must always read everything. But, I was following on Twitter, I was reading the print updates about it, and that quote immediately jumped out. And it really, I think, meant something to hear it written into a presidential address. And he went on to say, and I'm quoting here, "We have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system." He said systemic racism in our criminal justice system. Then surely he had the recent trial of Derek Chauvin, the Minneapolis police officer who murdered George Floyd, in mind, I think, when he said that.
Yeah, and Sugi, like you, I did go back and read a speech I did watch clips on YouTube, and I there are lots, I liked the part where he noted that Nancy Pelosi and Kamala Harris were the first time he was introducing a vice president and speaker of the House who were women. I thought that was cool. But those written lines that you're referring to, and all the lines that have been written about social injustice and police brutality before and after the Chauvin trial itself, got us to wondering specifically about the role writers have been playing in addressing racial injustice. And this is, after all, a politics and literature podcast. And we wanted to talk a little bit about specifically how the literary scene in your hometown, Minneapolis, St. Paul, is reacting to police violence and brutality against Black people there, like the murder of George Floyd, or more recently, Dante Wright.
And I think we're also curious about how the Twin Cities and Minnesota as a whole has somehow been both an ostensibly liberal bastion, a state that famously welcomes immigrants and refugees, and at the same time, or subsequently, a much less welcoming, hyper-racist environment. Later in the episode, we'll talk to St. Paul-based author Kaokalia Yang about her experience as a refugee and her perception of anti-immigrant sentiments in her city. But first, we want to get into it with Michael Kleber-Diggs about the Twin Cities literary scene. Michael is a poet, essayist, and literary critic living in St. Paul. His debut poetry collection, Worldly Things, won the Max Rietveld Poetry Prize and is forthcoming from Milkweed, which is here. Among other places, Michael's writing has appeared or is forthcoming in Great River Review, Waterstone Review, Poem a Day, Poetry Northwest, Potomac Review, Hunger Mountain, Memorious, and a few anthologies. Michael is a past fellow with the Givens Foundation for African American Literature, a past winner of the Loft Mentor Series in Poetry, and the former Poet Laureate of the Anoka County Libraries. His work has been nominated for a Pushcart and Best of the Net and has been supported by the Minnesota State Arts Board and the Jerome Foundation. Michael also teaches creative writing through the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop and at colleges and high schools in Minnesota. Michael, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. We'd love to have you start by reading Grinding Down to Prayer, your poem for George Floyd.
Sure. Grinding Down to Prayer for George Floyd. I woke to the news you were dead. The what arrived before daylight. The how was an agony unfolding as I dreaded my way to dusk. Unfolding against my want not to know, but I already knew, have known since I could know. Officers arrest Black man, 20 video knee, sir, $8 counterfeit hands. Sorry, 46, mama, please, breathe, please. Were you tired, George? I feel tired sometimes. America on my neck, my lungs compressed so much they can't expand, contract, take in, send out, oxygen, words. My dentist says I grind my teeth. My molars are wearing smooth. The next night, I jolted awake to find my fists clenched tight, some fight, my heart pounding fast, my mouth hanging open, slack, not tight that time. Just me on my own, gasping for air 6 times a minute. A raspy sound. The world was darkness. My room was darkness. I lay in a state of in-between and thought of you, but also God. I wanted the sun, but did not ask. I hoped instead for a quiet dawn and peace for us. Real peace for us. I hoped so hard, it almost made a prayer.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah.
There are so many lines in that poem that just stay with me and stay with me. So you live in St. Paul now, but you were born and grew up in Kansas.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit?
What part of Kansas? Because I live in Kansas City.
Right. So I was born in Kansas City, and I lived there until I was almost 9, and then we moved to Wichita. Then I went to undergrad at Lawrence, at the University of Kansas, I should say.
Wow.
And then moved to the Twin Cities in 1990. So I'm 53 years old. I've lived in Minnesota longer than I've lived anywhere. I was born and raised in Kansas, but I consider Minnesota my home.
So wait, can I just ask? I don't want to derail this, but I like it when guests come from Kansas City. What part of the city did you grow up in?
So I was in Kansas, and we lived. Our house was in Argentine.
Oh yeah, I know that area.
I went to Silver City Elementary School, and that's where I was a student at the point that we moved to Wichita. So.
Oh, cool. Well, anyway, come back anytime.
Right. So, I mean, you guys probably don't have a ton of podcast guests who are from Kansas City and now live in the Twin Cities. So
I think you might be our one, who gets both of our home, current living environments. Yes.
Right.
So how have the Twin Cities changed in this long span of time? I mean, you and I are on the board of the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop together. You're the president of that board. But this is a story I haven't heard. How have the Twin Cities changed in that time?
So I think that we've become more diverse. That's the first part. I was looking the other day on the internet, and I saw that Minnesota is the 29th most diverse state. So bottom half on that count, but it's more diverse than it was in 1990. The other thing I noticed that's different is the internet, which really wasn't so much a thing when I first moved here, and it is now. There was no Facebook, there was no Nextdoor. If you read a newspaper article and you had a comment about it, there was no place at the bottom of the article to add that comment, which is kind of my way of saying that I'd like to argue the Twin Cities aspect of the Twin Cities that is struggling with race and with multiculturalism and with extending humanity to everyone has not changed. We just know more about that than we used to.
I wonder, I mean, the other thing that I think that sort of happened simultaneously that we're trying to discuss in this episode is that Minneapolis became this incredible, maybe the second city of publishing in America, I think, other than New York. And, well, I'm proud of Kansas City and we're doing cool things here, but still we don't have the number of, we have Andrews McMeel's a really good press, but there's a ton of great presses there and all kinds of literary life that grew up during this time. And yet at the same time, I'm wondering how that literary life has been reacting to the murder of George Floyd and other incidents like that.
Yeah, no, you make a good point, Whitney. We have Milkweed here, Coffee House is here, Gray Wolf is here, Mizna is here. And we have a vibrant and thriving literary arts community that's part of a vibrant and thriving arts community. And, when events happen that shape a city, when Derek Chauvin kills George Floyd, and before that, Philando Castile, and before that, Jamar Clark, and since then, Dante Wright, and you start to get a sense for the character of a place. Minnesota is not one thing, and it's not one place. And there are a lot of people who live here representing a lot of different traditions and philosophies and ideas. And we express that a lot of times through literature. When I think about our literary arts scene, I'd like to think that we are close knit in some respects. I'd like to think that we're not given over to scarcity thinking, that we can be generous and supportive of each other, and gravitate toward abundance and recognition that if it's not my turn tonight, it will be next year or the year after. But I also would say that we have some of the same separation that exists in Minnesota at large exists within our literary spaces. I think from time to time about this Dick Gregory quote, the comedian and civil rights activist and like vegetarian who was, really prominent in the 60s and 70s. And he said, in the South, you can get as close as you want as long as you don't get too big, speaking of Black people. And in the North, you can get as big as you want as long as you don't get too close. And one of the things that exists within our communities here is real spatial separation. People of color tend to gather in the metro areas, in the Twin Cities, and within specific neighborhoods within the Twin Cities. And white people tend to, largely inhabit the suburbs and exurbs and specific neighborhoods in the Twin Cities. But that also happens a little bit in our literary community. There are a lot of people here who are making a conscious effort to promote racial equity, gender equity, to eradicate ableism and misogyny from our literary scene here. There are a group of writers who are working hard to make sure that, for example, poetry readings always include people of color and consider racial diversity as they're putting panels together and things along those lines. We also have a number of writers of color who are gathering in community who are doing just fine. We've got our own thing, and we're super happy with how it's going. Everyone's welcome to come, and if only our people come, we're cool with that. But I do think that there's been an effort to be more inclusive, to challenge racial injustice, and to look for ways to bring forward voices that have historically been excluded.
I want to say one thing before I forget to do this, which is your book came out. Is it a 2020 or 2021 book?
It's a 2021 book, right. And it's coming out in June.
It's going to come out. Okay.
Yeah.
My university and the state of Missouri, with a bunch of universities, is starting a Maya Angelou Book Award for writing about social justice. The applications are due May 3rd. Call your publisher on Monday and send something in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That's all. I just wanted to remind you to do that.
I do have, by the way, and I probably overtell this story, but I do have a Maya Angelou story.
And that's right. It's Angelou. I keep forgetting to do that, but you're right.
When I was 14 or 15, she came to Wichita, and my mom's like, we're going to go have dinner with friends that we ate with often. And a very special guest is going to be there and you have to come. So I was at that. My brother and I were both at that age where we were like, we had our own calendar. I don't want to go have dinner with some poet or whatever. Anyway, we were required to go. It was amazing. I couldn't get over it. Her voice, her personality, she was super down to earth and engaging. And she acted the entire time like someone who was always at that house for dinner. And then after we left, I started to check out her work and got a sense for who I shared dinner with. And I was in awe of her before that. But after that, I'm glad I didn't know. I would have been too nervous.
Well, so she was born in St. Louis, which I didn't know. So we're reclaiming her, or trying to claim her, for Missouri, and her family's involved in this. I never got to meet her, so I feel nice. Like I'm jealous.
Yeah.
That is such a cool story. I like the idea of, I'm imagining now little Michael hanging out with Maya Angelou. I think one of the things that you just said about Minnesota literary culture that's so interesting to me is that we don't have a culture of scarcity. And I think that one of the ways that manifests kind of aesthetically is that there's like a feeling to me here that one can take artistic risks, that there's greater freedom to do that because there's not such a premium on, for example, space. Like you see a lot of writers who maybe in other cities would be like writing alone in their apartments, like maybe here doing performance things that they might not have space to do elsewhere. That's just one example. And then I think it also, I don't know, leads to interesting takes on form. And one of the poems in your book that made me think about this was the poem for Freddie Gray. I'm from Maryland. And I thought of asking you to read this. And then I looked at the poem, and I'll see if I can, for those of you who are not on our YouTube channel, check it out and you can see the visual of this poem, which has some really stunning elements that, there's boldface, there's strike through, there's like this way that the poem handles time, as though like so many different timelines are happening in the poem at the same time, which I found to be like a really powerful way to think about Freddie Gray's murder. And it's such a visual poem. I wondered how you think about reading it aloud. And also I would love to hear you talk about playing with form and text on the page when you're writing.
Yeah. So in the form, in that poem, literally what's happening is the reader's asked to imagine that a journalist has written a newspaper article about what happened to Freddie Gray, who was killed in police custody as a result of a rough ride, which was common in Baltimore at the time, that police would put someone in the back of a van and then hard turns and sudden stops, while they're handcuffed. Just absolutely brutal behavior. So in the poem, I imagine that a journalist has written a poem or a newspaper article about that incident. And in that article, they've extended to Freddie Gray full humanity. He's an actual person. He has siblings. When the article talks about where he lives, there are no pejoratives that are applied to it. It's just a place where people live. No assumptions are made about the knife. And to the extent that his past, his history with the criminal system is referenced, it's contextualized. But that an editor comes through and strikes out certain passages and adds new descriptors in bold type. And for me as a writer, so at the time I was working in a law department at a logistics company, and I negotiated a lot of contracts. And the way that that's done is you track your changes and you delete things that don't work for you, and you add new language as a proposal. And so what doesn't work is removed or proposed for removal, and what you'd like to add appears in bold type and in a different color usually. So I was drawing on that background and writing that poem and hoping to have a conversation about journalism and the way that journalism talks about people who've died as a result of institutional or state violence, and the tendency to embrace all too willingly negative stereotypes and other things, and also to not speak about the people who have died as real people, as full human beings, to set them within the context of a lived life. And in terms of reading it, I've done it two ways. So because I've been Zoom reading a lot, I have been able to put it on a screen. So I read what the journalist wrote, and behind me is the text that has been changed. When I read the audiobook or recorded the audiobook for Worldly Things, I had to retype the poem basically as two poems, and I just read both versions back to back. But when that idea came to me, it kind of allowed me to have a conversation that I wanted to have, and that's a conversation that is important to me in the book itself and in my life. I never want to plead for my humanity to be seen. The people who can't see it are not the people I'm trying to reach, but I do want to place within context our national tendency, and I'm sure it exists in other countries as well, to justify, to blame the victim.
Yeah.
And to begin early on the practice of justifying what happened to them, even if it's absolutely not justifiable, even if like a 9-year-old would know that it's wrong.
You know,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Suki.
Oh, I just was going to say, I mean, I think one of the things in reading that poem, that, I mean, as a former journalist, like looking at it, right, there's the moments when your version names him, and then right, the editor comes through and strikes the name out and says, you know, the suspect or
Yeah.
anything like that. Just these are the sort of subtle distinctions, the ways in which the words erase the person or don't. And yeah, I was really curious about how it would sound because I found how it looked to be so powerful.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I mean, again, both of you are talking about like a way of thinking about the written word and thinking about how journalism works. And while we're going to start talking about your poems individually, but I wanted to ask both Sugi and Michael, as somebody who's an outsider, you know, did it help or has it helped? Like Michael, your work is published by Milkweed, this new book, right? And Kalia, who we're going to interview next, she's also published by a Minnesota Press. Has it helped that there is this literary scene, that people are publishing books about that, or is it not good enough? Is it not helpful? Does it, you know, I just want to know, like, it seems like in Minnesota is unique in being able to speak in certain ways and publish certain things and get news out like this poem. And I wondered if that has made a difference at all. Hard question.
I would defer to Michael to go first, because I mean, I mean, I have friends who have been published by these presses, and I know people who work at these presses, but I myself am not published by them. I appreciate a lot of the events that they put on and the inclusivity that I often see them striving towards there and often succeeding. Like I know Grey Wolf had a conversation night before last that was actually along like also about like what is the meaning of how can poetry and storytelling help the Twin Cities heal in the wake of the Chauvin trial and George Floyd's murder, you know, and Heiderdrich and Roy Guzman and Sarah Bellamy and, oh my goodness, I'm afraid I'm Daniel. I'm not remembering the last name. I think that last panelist was maybe not from the Twin Cities, but it was this tremendous conversation, and it was put on by a Minnesota press. And I was so grateful to be able to dip into that. But I think, Michael, you probably have a lot more experience here than me.
And I feel like we're on the way is what it gets down to. I think that the last 5 years, and there's a couple things that are happening there. There's the death of the killing of Jamar Clark in 2015. There's the election of Donald Trump in 2016. And then I think there's an increasing inability to deny that we're not a post-racial, we have to acknowledge that we're not post-racial, and that the legacies of the past are very much present in the way that we conduct ourselves today. And I know that Coffee House has been very intentional about elevating international voices. Grey Wolf has been very intentional about making sure that their roster is diverse, and Milkweed has as well. And by the way, to your point, Sugi, I mean, the Twin Cities, a real important part of our rich literary scene are writers like Dinesh Smith, Roy Guzman, Hyde Erdrich, Louise Erdrich, Sun Young Shin, Su Huang, yourself, myself. There are a lot of writers of color here who are doing amazing things. Janata Petrus Alma. I could just go on. Marlon James. Like, how can we forget Marlon James?
Who's been on the show with us.
I saw that.
Yeah.
So we have a wonderfully rich literary tradition in general and among writers of color. And I think that those presses and MISNA, for those who don't know, is a literary organization that's primarily focused on elevating Middle Eastern voices. And they have a film festival as well. And so I think that we have a really good foundation to work from. And I think we have now a recognition that more work needs to be done. And organizations like Free Black Dirt and Black Table Arts and others are really, I think, leading the way in terms of pulling forward voices that have historically had to really kind of fight for publication and for book contracts and things along those lines.
And I think along journalistic lines, I've heard several people complain and or sort of point to the whiteness of, for example, NPR. Minnesota is also a place where there's, like Sahan Journal, which is an outlet covering primarily immigrant voices.
Well, it's not going to be Prairie Home Companion anymore, right?
Seriously.
I mean, that's over.
And then there's also the Minnesota Reformer, which is published you, and which I like to follow as a source of kind of more progressive, more inclusive news. So there's the criticism, and then there's the space to make something else, which I think is really cool.
And that's such a huge part of it, is that when we talk about space, when we talk about geographic space, like a state, there's a tendency, and people and things, like this is a part of the human condition. There's a tendency to make it portable, and so it's this contained thing. And look, we clearly have a problem with policing in Minnesota. We have no shortage of people who are absolutely okay with the kind of policing that we have in Minnesota today. And then we have this large, so in some respects, underseen community of people, people of color and not, who are saying that they want something different. That media story is not as dramatic. It doesn't tend to play as well. We definitely are, I think, moving in separate spaces. My daughter went to a high school in downtown St. Paul, and she was surrounded by children who are not struggling on any issues with respect to bias and that type of thing. And they're having, very thoughtful and important conversations about gender, about race, about sexual orientation, and so on. And they're just seeing each other and really recognizing their right to be who they are. And I always said to her, honey, you do not have to drive very far at all to find high school students who are not with you. And I just want you to be aware of that. So those lines that we make, but Minnesota is a lot of things, and there's a lot of things happening here in the media space, in the arts space, and in the literary arts as well.
Other themes in your writing about Blackness includes the idea that and you're referencing that just a little bit toward the end of that answer, that the Black middle class has some level of respectability or shielding that Black people from working class communities don't have. You also explore the idea of Black naturalism, that Black people don't just belong in urban spaces, but in the Midwest, in rural communities, in nature. And we see you in those places in the collection. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of expanding and complicating what it means to be Black through?
Right. And that conversation is one that I simultaneously feel is important to have, and also is kind of challenging to have. I have a history with police officers that includes some difficult moments. I also have a measure of resiliency when I'm encountering the police that comes as a result of kind of class privilege that I've had my entire life. I've always had proof of insurance. I've always had current plates. I've always had cars that work, except for those kind of character building moments in college when I know that my old 1978 Volkswagen Rabbit diesel is in between, on my way toward a functional car. I had absolute confidence in that. At the same time, those kinds of resiliencies, or what we might imagine as resiliency, only work if people can see them. And if people are responding to me, if police officers, for example, are responding to me as a Black man, and they're not doing anything else, it doesn't matter what I do for a living, what I earn, even what kind of car I have. If they're invested in a problem, there will be one. And the examples of this, about where respectability fails us, are abundant. Senator Tim Scott, who I'm kind of mad at this week, talked about how he got pulled over by police 7 times in 1 week. There's the example of the Army lieutenant from Virginia who just bought a new car and couldn't even get home while wearing his Army uniform. So there's a little bit of a myth kind of connected to that. And at the same time, I don't ever want to suggest that the advantages that I've had as a result of being born in a home with 2 educated parents who were invested in my success and invested in my education and all of those things puts me in the same position as people who have not had those advantages. Sugi, you and I work with Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop, and when I walk into those rooms, it's impossible for me not to have a "there but for the grace of God go I" type of reaction. I was born into a home that allowed me a lot of advantages and blessings, and a lot of our students were not. They are as gifted as I am. They are often more intelligent than I am, but they grew up in circumstances that made it very difficult for them to stay out of a system that was really invested in getting them in.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of amazing writers there, and also as one hears about their lives, yeah, definitely an understanding that you start to understand, as you said, like I also grew up with so many privileges that so many of those incarcerated writers who are wildly talented don't have. And yet one of the things that I love about working with them is that their writing, like your writing, has in it also, while it contains this deep understanding of history, like also a striving for joy. And your writing about racism and racial violence is often written about in conjunction with this idea of Black joy. And you wrote an essay, Letter from St. Paul, on the complex flavors of Black joy, which appeared on our own beloved Lit Hub and is also in a new volume edited by John Freeman and Tracy K. Smith. And that volume is called There's a Revolution Outside My Love, Letters from a Crisis.
Friends of the show also.
Yeah.
I want to say hi to Tracy and John.
Yeah.
They're wonderful. And this book, which I'm so excited to read, is out in a week and has so many terrific writers in it. I wonder if you can read from this piece for us and talk a little bit about what Black joy means to you in the face of systemic racism.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll read a passage from page 40 of the book. I'm shy in ways and shy about my body. I don't have much rhythm and overuse the same 4 dance moves. Where I live, my skin, bittersweet like 70% chocolate, is conspicuous on good days, but felt notorious then. Still does. I danced anyway. I felt like I was supposed to show sadness or mourning, and I was sad. I do mourn. I danced anyway. It felt revolutionary, so I won't let it feel wrong. The music would hit just right. I'd stop. I'd throw my head back. I'd roll my arm like I was learning how to hit a speed bag, slow like that. I swayed left and right. Sometimes I thought about second wave feminism. I thought about how the personal is political, how the lived experiences of people suffering within inhumane systems are inherently political, can spark an uprising. Then both arms, my hips, my feet, their pattern no longer a forward gait, more like a crip walk, or what a crip walk would have looked like if I knew how to crip walk. Sometimes I thought about Paul Laurence Dunbar as we wear the mask. We smile, but oh, great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile. And how Maya Angelou's adaptation in The Mask honors Dunbar. My life has been one great big joke, a dance that's walked, a song that spoke. I laughed so hard, I almost choke. So you see, my dance was a knowing dance. My dance was my truth, and my dance was my lie. I already knew that where I live, the tree-lined streets, the middle-class people in houses that are mostly well-maintained, the park 1 block away, the lake, the golf course, the few other Black families anywhere nearby. Where I live, my dance can never be just a dance. Not during a summer of race hate and rising up. My dance was also a mask. In the white gaze, it will always either confirm or disrupt some expectation. My dance was conspicuous and aware it was observed, aware of context. My dance was derived from the art of survival, spirituals and chain gangs, poems and a wobble. My dance reminded me I'm here. It gave me strength to go the length. My dance was resilient and defiant, righteous and right, powered by joy, powered by Big Boy, who asked if I ever found myself between a rock and a dark place, or if I've ever gone to sleep just to claim a chance to dream. Chocolate came out in 2017. I heard it for the first time in early June 2020 while watching a Seth Rogen and Charlize Theron movie. It's easy to explain how I missed the song's ascendancy and zenith. I listened to a lot of public radio and books on tape. Music is a big part of my life, but my daughter is often embarrassed by my tendency to obsess over songs 2 or more years after their moment. I was deep into the music video for Chocolate 2. It begins, we're told, at 8:37 p.m. in Atlanta, Georgia, with Big Boy playfully disguised as a driver from a ride-sharing app. He's behind the wheel of a high-end, late-model sedan and picking up 3 Black women who are dressed provocatively as one would for a night at a voluptuary club in a libertine city. When asked, the women say they're going to shoot a music video for Big Boy. Then begins a series of orgasmic jump cuts featuring rap video bodies and rap video costumes doing rap video calisthenics. The phrase ends with Big Boy expressing an enduring goal beyond the more immediate one. Making music for people that be feeling me, he says. In the kitchen, listening to Chocolate, my daughter asked if the song is about what she thought it was about. I said yes, kind of quickly, too quickly. After I answered, a thought crossed my mind. If it's a club song and only a club song, how does it mean so much to me? Why? I listened again. I felt joy within a broader sorrow. I floated. I was light. I stopped. I threw my head back. I closed my eyes in ecstasy, like I was tasting for the first time a dessert many people have loved for years. Sometimes I said, I deserve pleasure. I said it out loud. Whenever I listened to Chocolate, I felt connected to something older and vaster than the moment or me. I decided that just cashed a check and I'm about to blow it all on Chocolate is a utopian manifesto on Black separatism. It's about the pleasure of payday and the value of spending money in our community. It's about Black folks supporting each other. Many of the businesses that burned down in Minneapolis and St. Paul and cities all over America were Black owned or owned by people of color. The overwhelming majority of the fires weren't started by us, although a few were. We'll need to rebuild like our parents did, and their parents did, and theirs, and theirs. But it's payday, and I have coins for the cause now. In that moment, Big Boy goes on to say he's going to make his money stretch, and I feel committed to making my dollars go as far as they can in our community too. I decided when Big Boy raps about backing it up, he's imploring Black people to follow through on our commitment to meaningful change. And yes, in America, in Minnesota, in St. Paul, on a street where I live, I have found myself between a rock and a dark place. I have felt like all my options are bad here. I have realized I don't feel comfortable anywhere, and I have slept for a dream and shuffled for one and bobbed my head to one, all knowingly. When Big Boy mentioned standing up and standing rock, I decided it's because we're still here. In spite of everything, we're still on our feet. And yeah, Standing Rock is doing a lot of work. I caught its connection to sexual readiness, but at first for me, it connected the Black experience with injustice to Indigenous people's experience with injustice, to a broader injustice. It made the song intersectional. In early listening, before I got the innuendo, the reference to Standing Rock seemed like a quick aside, like bringing politics to the party. It made me think even our play is serious. We're bringing sorrow to our joy now. We're multitasking emotionally like always because we don't have a choice. And you asked about joy. And for me in my writing, when I'm reflecting on joy, I think I'm doing 2 things. The first is reminding myself that joy is a critical part of the human experience. And it's something that we feel and sometimes allow ourselves to feel, even during moments of adversity. I think about every Black funeral I've been to that includes during the repast, during the meal after the funeral, just these moments of absolute laughter. That person who we have lost was a real character. Our hearts are broken, but while we're together, we're always going to laugh too. And then I always also, I think, try to do it as a rebuttal to what can be the dominant narrative about the Black experience, or the tendency among, again, probably more the media, to see us in specific and narrow terms. And of course, like all people, we're complicated, and we have multiple experiences and feelings all at the same time. And in my writing, sometimes I just want to really be conspicuous about that.
That was so good.
Thank you.
Isn't that such a great passage?
Yeah. I think we want to end it close by just asking you, what do you hope literary life in the Twin Cities will be like in the future? And how would you like to see it change, if at all?
Yeah. I'd like us to continue to be more intentional about reaching out to people who don't feel like they have a place for their voice. I was just, you think about how people are educated in the Western tradition and all the teaching that we do. I, of course, listened with great interest to your most recent podcast about craft and workshop, and how we can bring specific cultural traditions forward into those kinds of conversations. And so I would like us to continue to be more inclusive, to make space for more voices and cultures. I also think we would do well to value and honor when communities are totally good and don't need us, like they're doing their own thing and it's beautiful, and they're content to do it the way that they're doing it. And where they're happy to have us join, but they don't need us to do that. I'm also really focused on two other things. The first is including young people, trying to find a way to reach writers and artists early, and appreciate them and love them up and tell them what's possible. When I talk to young people about being a writer, I always make sure they ask me about money. How do you make money? What are the different ways to do it? I want it to be viable. I want it to be a career choice that people can make early and commit to, and feel supported in, and excited about. And then I also, of course, really want to make sure that when we're defining our writing community, we're just saying all writers, and writers who are currently incarcerated, who were incarcerated or otherwise. I want to make sure that we're pulling their voices forward too, finding a way to tear down those prison walls metaphorically while we do the work of tearing them down, actually, creating a more just society. So I'm all in for just whatever's more inclusive and supportive and nurturing, and thinking about how our spaces are more vibrant when there's a lot of different cool things happening.
That is such a wonderful set of dreams for us. And I hope that I look forward to all of those coming true. And Michael, thank you so much for joining us. And to our listeners, you can support Michael Kleber-Diggs by picking up a copy of his debut poetry collection, Worldly Things, which will be out on June 8th and is available now for pre-order from Milkweed. Michael, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.